Hello everybody, this is Yasmin from Yarkspiri and welcome to another illustration video tutorial. So for this week's tutorial, the request was that I actually draw two winged deer fighting, and that essentially they're making contact enough so that there's actually sparks flying off their antlers. So this was an interesting request because it allowed me to experiment a bit with the camera angles that I was going to use, especially with a four-legged animal. Because a four-legged creature does require quite a bit more accuracy, and because I don't normally draw them all that often, the first thing I did was to look up at some references and reference materials I do carry, both online and also in my reference library. So I was looking at quite a bit of anatomy books to get the general anatomy correct, and you will actually see me periodically go in and actually change and modify the anatomy that I already have to make sure that it's a bit more accurate. I will also do some rough plotting out the planes so that I also understand some of the perspective involved in this. Now, because I wanted to have a more dynamic angle, I really wanted to show a low angle where essentially you can see the clash between the two deer. Now, I did contemplate whether or not I actually wanted them on the ground or not. I decided to actually have them on the ground instead of actually in flight. There's a couple of reasons for this. The main one was that I really wanted to show the power that was in these creatures as they were fighting. Now, since the background elements of these were pretty simple and I didn't add too much elements to, so I didn't have too much to worry about, this drawing actually took about 5 hours to complete. So it wasn't a very long illustration, but it did have quite a few technical things that I had to worry about as I was working on the initial stages. So as you can see, this stage I'm keeping things still extremely rough. I haven't added or fine-tuned some of the anatomy or details, mainly because I'm still trying to figure out the proper proportions and my color and lighting. Color and lighting at this stage are very important, so I'm spending more time on those elements to make sure that those are accurate before I start moving on. I've already figured out the rough composition, so I'm not too worried at this point about the composition. But I really need to fine-tune some elements to make sure that certain elements are more visible or really show some of the detail that I want to have, and I have to tone back other elements to make sure it's not overdone. At this stage I actually started experimenting with some of the anatomy, so I am going in with the soft round brush in order to actually add some of the details of this illustration. So the moment I start doing this, once again I start referring back to my anatomy reference material to make sure that I haven't missed anything or that I don't have to fix anything. Now I will end up modifying that back leg because I do realize that the top portion of that leg is not entirely correct. It's a bit too short, so I will actually lengthen that out afterwards. As you can see, I just moved that back just slightly to help even up the proportions a bit, and I'm also starting to plot out the actual anatomy for that thigh. So I've started working out some of those muscles. All these muscles are flexed at this moment in time because he is trying to actually essentially put his strongest muscles forward so they can really push against the antlers of his opponent. So for this reason it is very important that I really show some of the details that I can of the muscles that would be used in this situation. So I'm going to experiment on and off essentially with what type and how I'm actually going to plot out and showcase some of those muscles. Because I don't want to add too much detail, but it is important that I add enough that the lower part of the leg does tie in with the rest of the body as well. So I'm just experimenting with the highlights. Essentially I'm adding information and then toning it back, and I'm going back and forth between these to help showcase the proper anatomy and to prevent myself from adding too much information too soon. it's really easy to get carried away with the level of detail, so something you have to worry about constantly, and you have to be willing to essentially cover up some of those details to make sure that they don't become too overbearing. Now, because the second back leg is further off in the distance, I do have it more faded out, so I don't have to add as much information because it is further away from the viewer. The main focus point is the lower left leg of the deer and not the right, and therefore I don't add as much information. Also, the colors are slightly more toned back in comparison to the other leg. Just working on the tail, as you can see. Now I'm just going to start working on the rest of the body. Because I've added all the information for the legs, most of the information is already there and most of the difficult parts are already completed, so the rest of it doesn't end up taking all that long. Because I essentially don't have to add as much information because those parts of the bodies are further away. You will see me barely touch the second deer simply because I don't need to because of the lighting I'm going to use, and also because that deer is way further back in the distance. Working on the hooves. Now, as I'm working on the hooves, I am looking at more detailed anatomy reference material so I can figure out the proper way to pose out those elements. Working out the wings. Now, for the wings, I wasn't using the soft round brush at all. I was actually using my flat brush that I had created a while back. The main reason why I did that is because that brush actually adds a slight texture to the image, and because of this, it actually works quite well for plumage because it adds that little bit of grain that I need to make it look a little bit more real. I'm just tying in the rest of the colors. Okay, now on some of the background elements. And I'm moving back and forth between some of the background elements at this point and actually the deer's head. And I'm modifying some of the highlights to make sure that they work better with the lighting. I've essentially created a separate saturation layer so that I can just view everything in grayscale. So I just started adding the sparks, as you can see, and I'm just tying in those colors with the rest of the information that's already in the scene. And I'm also adding some highlights to the ground just below it and directly on the two deer. Now I'm keeping the background very basic. Once again, it's because I don't want to distract away from the two deer fighting. So for this reason, I don't end up adding too much information on those elements. Just adding some foliage, and this image is pretty much done, as you can see. If you want to have your say on what's drawn for next week's video tutorial, or have some additional questions about my drawing process, please leave a comment below. I will take the feedback you guys give me and try to answer your questions while working on next week's painting. If you want to see some of my previous works, please feel free to check out the annotations on the side of this video, or visit my channel for the full playlist. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you guys soon. Thank you and take care.